The story begins with a girl named Joanna, who is terrified. Late at night, she has already packed her belongings, ready to flee, as strange sounds echo through the house. Panicked, Joanna bolts out of the house. While on the road, she feels an invisible presence trailing her, certain that she's being followed. Frightened, she runs to her boyfriend Manu, who comforts her and takes her to his hotel, which he owns. In the safety of the hotel room, Joanna tries to explain to Manu that something is after her, though he sees nothing unusual. She then begins recounting eerie stories her mother used to tell her during childhood. Joanna's mother had learned these tales from the nuns she lived with as a child, including a chilling warning: never open the door if someone knocks 3 times after midnight, or a curse would follow. One fateful night, Joanna heard knocking at the door. Despite her mother's warnings, curiosity got the better of her. She opened the door, but no one was there. Moments later, she glimpsed a demonic figure. Terrified, she rushed to hide in the house, but her mother discovered her and furiously reprimanded her for breaking the rule. Joanna reveals to Manu that everything started 3 days ago, when she opened the door despite her mother's warnings, and ever since, strange and sinister events have surrounded her. Manu dismisses her fears, insisting it's just her imagination fueled by her mom's eerie stories. But as they talk, Joanna suddenly feels nauseous and rushes to the bathroom, vomiting. Concerned, Manu decides to go to a nearby shop to get supplies, even though Joanna begs him not to leave, warning him of the curse. Left alone in the hotel room, Joanna tries to calm herself. She washes her face in the bathroom, then sends a message to her older sister, Jamie, asking her to come home. Jamie, who lives abroad, responds with concern, but doesn't immediately understand the gravity of the situation. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door. Assuming it's Manu, Joanna checks the peephole, but no one is there. Terrified, she backs away, but the knocking resumes. The room plunges into chaos. Panicked, she locks herself in the bathroom, but the relentless entity bangs violently on the door until it breaks in. The lights go out, and in the darkness, Joanna is brutally taken out. The scene shifts to Jamie, devastated after learning of her sister's demise. She immediately returns to their family home. Her uncle, Tito, picks her up from the dock. On the drive, Tito shares the grim news. While the police ruled Joanna's demise as a tragic accident, locals whisper suspicions about her boyfriend, Manu. Joanna's family had never liked him. Before reaching the family home, Tito takes Jamie to visit the abandoned house where their mother, Lillette, grew up with a group of nuns. The house exudes an unsettling aura. Finally, they arrive at the family home, where Jamie is met with coldness from Lillette. Jamie had left her family years ago, estranged from them partly due to the strange and unsettling stories her mother Lillette began telling after their father's demise. Before Jamie views her sister's body, she reconnects with Julius, who is visibly shaken. He's desperate for answers, upset that no one will tell him what really happened to Joanna or how she passed away. In his grief, Julius clings to his notebooks, where he sketches and documents his thoughts. As Jamie flips through one of his notebooks, she's alarmed to find disturbing drawings of demonic figures and cryptic symbols. It dawns on her that Lillette has been telling Julius the same twisted tales she once told Joanna and Jamie as children. Jamie, unsettled, warns Julius not to take their mother's stories seriously. Later, Jamie goes to comfort her mother. The two begin discussing Joanna's demise, and Lillette sorrowfully repeats her supernatural tales. Jamie asks her to stop spouting nonsense. Julius tries to step in to calm them down, his voice shaking as he begs them to stop. He also tells them that Manu has arrived at the funeral. As soon as Lillette sees Manu at the funeral, she flies into a rage, screaming at him for abandoning Joanna that night. She orders him to leave, and Manu, overwhelmed, complies. Jamie follows him outside, determined to get answers about what really happened. Manu, visibly shaken, finally confesses. He explains that something supernatural was after Joanna that night, and though he didn't believe her at first, he's certain now. He admits that ever since that night, strange things have been happening to him too. Jamie, however, dismisses his fears. Later, after everyone else has left, Jamie finally steels herself to view Joanna's body at the open casket funeral. As Jamie stands there, shaken, she suddenly feels a dark presence behind her. Before she can turn around, she hears 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the door. Tense, Jamie walks to the door, ignoring her growing fear. Just as she reaches for the handle, Lillette appears, grabbing her arm and warning her not to open it. Jamie brushes her off and opens the door anyway. To her relief, it's only Tito. He hands her the bags, exchanges a few kind words, and leaves. The next morning, Jamie suggests to Julius that he come stay with her for a while. Julius agrees, admitting he could use a change. At the cemetery later that day, the family gathers to say their final goodbyes to Joanna. Amid the somber mood, Julius asks Lillette if he can leave with Jamie for a few days. Lillette agrees. After everyone leaves, Jamie lingers by Joanna's grave, lost in thought. Manu approaches her, his face pale and tear-streaked. He's visibly heartbroken, and as he begins to cry, Jamie tries to comfort him. Suddenly, Manu freezes. He hears 3 distinct knocks coming from Joanna's grave. His face contorts in terror, but when Jamie asks what's wrong, he can't bring himself to explain. Instead, he stumbles backward and flees, leaving Jamie bewildered and alone. That night, Jamie repeatedly tries calling Manu, but he doesn't answer. As she sits in the quiet of her home, there's a sudden knock at her main door. Jamie peeks out the window but sees no one. The knocks stop, but as she's about to head back upstairs, a faint sound from Julius's room catches her attention. Curious, she tiptoes to his door and peers inside. To her shock, she sees Julius and Lillette kneeling together, whispering fervent prayers. Then both of them abruptly stop and turn, locking eyes with Jamie. Jamie gasps and wakes up in her bed, drenched in sweat. It was just a dream, but something still feels off. As she catches her breath, her eyes dart to the corner of her room, where she sees Joanna. Jamie blinks, and her sister vanishes into thin air. The next day, Jamie and Julius leave the house. However, on their way out, Jamie comes up with a different plan. She tells Julius they'll spend the night at Manu's hotel. Julius is uneasy about the idea, but agrees to go along with his older sister. At the hotel, the atmosphere is tense. Once they settle into their room, Jamie decides it's time to open up about their family's troubled past. She reveals that when Lillette was pregnant with Julius, her relationship with their father was falling apart. Their father wanted to leave. They had a huge fight, and the next day, her father's body was found in a nearby river. Jamie puts all the blame of this on their mother. Julius can't take it anymore, so he decides to go back home. However, the weather gets too bad, and he is unable to do so. That night, after Julius falls asleep, Jamie is startled by a knocking sound. Despite her fear, she approaches the door and opens it. She notices blood on the floor and faint wet footprints leading to the room where Joanna perished. The door is ajar, and inside, the scene feels wrong. In the bathroom, the mirror is shattered, and the air feels thick with dread. Jamie freezes. Manu stands in the bathtub, his body rigid, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. He mutters incoherently. Jamie approaches him cautiously and snaps him out of his trance. Manu breaks down and confesses that, 2 nights ago, he heard knocking at his door. Against his better judgment, he opened it, and now, the Kumakatok is after him. Back in the room, Manu screams after seeing a demonic figure. His cries wake Julius, who panics at the commotion. Jamie works to calm them both, and eventually coaxes them back to sleep. The next morning, Jamie wakes to find Julius gone. Panicked, she rushes back to their family home and finds him bedridden and feverish, with Lillette tending to him. Lillette, protective and wary, refuses to let Jamie take Julius anywhere. She insists he must stay home and claims he needs her care to be safe from the curse. Afterwards, Jamie takes a walk with Manu, seeking clarity. Manu grows increasingly unsettled and warns Jamie to leave the village, which he believes is cursed. Jamie stays determined to uncover the truth about Joanna's demise. During their conversation, Jamie asks Manu about the knocking on her door the previous night. When Manu reveals he hasn't been near her room, he suggests the Kumakatok might now target Jamie. His words deepen Jamie's unease, but before she can process them, Manu's fear takes over, and he abruptly runs off. Jamie follows him to his house, where loud, rhythmic banging noises echo. Entering cautiously, she is horrified to see Manu repeatedly smashing his head against the wall. When he sees Jamie, he points at something behind her. Turning around, Jamie sees a dark, monstrous figure. The Kumakatok. The door slams shut, trapping her inside. The oppressive atmosphere grows unbearable as Manu's panic intensifies. When the door eventually reopens, Manu is lifeless, leaving Jamie in shock. This confirms that the curse is not just a story, it is real. Paramedics and police arrive shortly after, but Jamie is too shaken to provide much information. Tito appears later that evening and takes Jamie to the cemetery. There he shows her the grave of his wife, Lorna, and shares the tragic truth about the Kumakatok. Years earlier, Jamie's father was claimed by the curse, and Tito, being the only one who believed Lillette's warnings, tries to learn more about it. In doing so, he gets cursed. Tito explains that the Kumakatok demands a soul within 3 days, either the cursed individuals or someone they love. When it came for Tito, Lorna sacrificed herself to save him. He tells Jamie he is prepared to do the same for her. Hearing this leaves Jamie furious and heartbroken. She rejects the notion of further sacrifices, unwilling to let the curse dictate her family's fate. That night, Jamie begins seeing faint glimpses of Joanna's ghostly face. She tries to dismiss it as her imagination, but the fear lingers. Later, she wakes to the sound of persistent knocking. Looking out the window, she is startled to see her mother, Lillette, standing outside in the rain in the hotel's garden, staring up at her. Concerned, Jamie rushes to the door to let her in. However, the main door keeps opening and shutting on its own in an eerie, unnatural way. Before Jamie can reach it, Lillette vanishes from the courtyard entirely. Jamie freezes, unsure of what is happening. Suddenly, the grotesque hand of the Kumakatok appears on the door. Terror grips her as she turns to flee. The shadowy forms of the Kumakatok appear around every corner, As one lunges at her, Jamie manages to dart back into her room, slamming the door shut, but the knocking returns. Desperate, Jamie hides in the bathroom, where she stays until exhaustion overtakes her, and she falls asleep. The next day, the focus shifts to Julius, who is at home, watching a moth escape from his collection. Fascinated, he follows it down to the basement, where he begins to sense an ominous presence. Before he can react, Jamie arrives, determined to get him out of the cursed house once and for all. As she tries to convince Julius to leave, the candles in the room suddenly blow out, plunging them into darkness. Outside, a kumakatok appears, its hulking figure visible through the window. Moments later, another one enters the house, its twisted form stalking through the rooms. The siblings, paralyzed with fear, quickly hide. Jamie grabs a knife, clutching it tightly in case they are discovered. Just as the situation seems hopeless, they hear Tito's voice calling for them from outside. Seizing the opportunity, Jamie and Julius dash out of their hiding spot, bolting toward Tito. They explain what happened as the three of them jump into his car. Without looking back, they speed off toward Tito's house. A little while later, Lillette arrives at Tito's house, visibly shaken, but relieved to see Jamie and Julius safe. Jamie apologizes to her mother for doubting her warnings about the curse. Lillette, though tired, forgives her, and the family finds a brief moment of solace. That evening, as they sit together, Lillette shares old photos of Jamie's father, recalling memories that seem both comforting and haunting. While flipping through the photos, Lillette tells Jamie a chilling story. During a war, their village was once home to a group of nuns who cared for the injured. One day, an American soldier arrived, wounded. The nuns tended to him, but instead of gratitude, the soldier betrayed them, taking out the nuns in a fit of madness. Lillette speculates that the curse might be tied to the spirits of those nuns. Later that night, Jamie finds herself unable to sleep. Haunted by faint visions of Joanna, she decides to leave her room. Tito notices her and asks where she is going. Jamie lies, saying she needs to return home to fetch Lillette's forgotten medication. Concerned, Tito insists on going instead, and Jamie reluctantly agrees. Once Tito leaves, Jamie reveals her true plan. She intends to visit the ruins of the old convent where the nuns once lived, hoping to uncover more about the curse. Navigating through the night, Jamie eventually reaches the decrepit building. The place is eerie, with crumbling walls and a cold, otherworldly atmosphere. Inside, she discovers a circle of candles and an inscription on the wall saying, "They cannot enter." As Jamie explores, Lillette suddenly appears, having followed her daughter in secret. Suddenly, the kumakatok enters the ruins. Jamie and Lillette flee through the darkened halls and eventually barricade themselves in a small room, locking the door behind them. But the safety is short-lived. The creature begins pounding on the door with terrifying force. Jamie's heart aches as she stands near the broken window, pleading with Lillette to escape with her. But Lillette insists that Jamie go first, urging her daughter to survive while she stays behind. Lillette opens the door to the darkness outside, where the evil forces of the kumakatok await. Jamie screams for her mother to come through the window, but Lillette simply says her goodbyes, stepping into the abyss and allowing the malevolent forces to take her. Left alone in the cold night, Jamie weeps for her mother. By morning, with no choice but to face the harsh reality, she returns home, her heart heavy with loss. The scene shifts to Lillette's funeral. The village gathers, somber and silent, to pay their respects. Julius, devastated by the loss, walks away, retreating to his room. Jamie finds him and offers comforting words. As Jamie prepares to leave for the hospital to retrieve Lillette's certification, a new realization begins to form in her mind. She can't shake the thought of why the curse has targeted her. It becomes clear that the curse has a specific way of spreading. When someone dies from it, the curse targets the one who spoke to them last. In the final moments, Jamie stands beside her mother's body, overcome with grief. Suddenly, her phone rings, breaking the stillness. Meanwhile, Julius wakes up, disturbed by a noise outside his window. He cautiously approaches, unaware of the danger lurking outside. Jamie answers the phone, only to hear her mother's voice, distorted and cold, warning her not to open the door, that they are coming, and that the curse will eliminate their entire family. But before Jamie can process the warning, the call abruptly cuts off. The knocking begins on the door, loud and relentless. Despite her terror, Jamie resists opening it. However, when she turns around, her mother's body has disappeared. The room grows unnervingly cold, and the atmosphere thickens with dread. As Jamie turns back, her mother's spirit appears before her, twisted and controlled by the kumakatok. Overcome with fear, Jamie tries to escape, but in a moment of panic, she opens the door. The kumakatok are waiting outside, and they seize her instantly. The curse that has haunted her family claims its final victim, and Jamie's life is abruptly taken, completing the cycle of terror.